Okay, so how does this work in terms of from a big picture standpoint? So say you have certain segments that we have that have different characteristics, and some attributes of our product are going to connect with that segment. Well, what we need to identify first are what are those opportunities to communicate value to that particular segment. Can we as a company deliver value to that? Can our capabilities and segment, or can we match our capabilities to that segment? And from there we actually pick which ones we can reach more effectively and efficiently, and that becomes our target market. And then the positioning strategy is going to fall out of that in terms of we need to develop a positioning strategy for each specific target. So the question becomes, can you have the same product but have a different positioning strategy to different target markets? And a good example of that is the Discovery, Land Rover Discovery. So when Land Rover Discovery came out, it was a car that was a cool SUV, I guess. And so they thought the target market for the Land Rover Discovery was going to be like the macho guy, rough, rugged, etc. Well, they put out ads of the car being muddy, etc., and they were really targeting and trying to communicate value to that segment, to the macho male, who actually bought the Discovery. Do you guys know? Housewives, right? So the soccer mom. So what happened is the soccer mom actually was the person that resonated and connected with the Land Rover Discovery. So what they did is they subtly changed their positioning and recognized that and tried to capitalize on that, in that there were value elements of that car that really resonated with a different target market that they had in mind. So is that okay, positioning to the macho side and then back to the soccer mom side? Sure, but you have to be really careful in terms of how you do that. So some of the times that companies run into positioning challenges is, a good example is this backfired in the case of Harley-Davidson. When Harley-Davidson thought that they could expand and had a big connection into the female motorcycle market, well, what they did is they did ads and they created some products that were going to appeal directly to the female market. Well, what did that do? Well, initially when they tried that strategy, it alienated their core consumers. So you have to be careful in your positioning not to go somewhere astray that's going to disconnect from your core audience who's built your business over time. So it's just another strategic consideration that companies have to think about. So positioning really is communicating that benefit, but how you do it effectively is you need to communicate that benefit in a language that's relevant to your target market. And how do companies do this? Well, they choose different aspects of the product, and that positioning strategy is typically derived from that. And there's a few different ways that they can do it. They can look at it, they can do positioning on the features and service. And like, so FedEx has done a great example of this in terms of, on-time delivery, right? So they know that it's going to be there always on time, right? So they're trying to own that space in the mind of the consumers, and that's how they're trying to communicate value on that element. If you look at some of the other examples on this page, positioning within a particular category. So McDonald's, right? If you look at McDonald's vis-a-vis the other fast food restaurants, they make a conscious effort to connect to children, or historically have. They're trying to change that up a little bit now, and because they've been struggling, they're trying to position now and today on maybe more healthy choices and healthy elements. But historically, McDonald's has always been that kind of family-children connection in terms of their positioning. So this is just an example of some firms that have actually done a good job in terms of positioning themselves, and it has some larger firms and some smaller firms. And let's just talk about a couple of examples. So Target, right, our local company here, they've done a great job, and they've positioned on different elements in terms of who they compete with. So who's their main competitor? It's Walmart, right? So Walmart really typically was competing more on price, and Target was trying to position differently on more of the partnership with the designers in terms of more fashion and different elements within the store. And so this manifested in a number of ways in terms of what they were saying in their advertisement directly to consumers, but it also manifested in terms of how the stores were laid out. So now Walmart and Target stores look a little closer, but if you go back about 15 years, the Target stores had wider aisles, the Target stores had brighter lights, the Target stores had cleaner merchandising. So they were trying to connect to a little bit different target. And like I said, there's been competitive convergence in this categories as well. And so Walmart has tried to look a little bit more like Target. And Target, based on some of the recent financial crisis, et cetera, they've had to actually make and try to emphasize their low prices too, and become a little more of that positioning to be more like Walmart. So it's interesting to see how it plays out over time and how the category positioning changes, decisions change over time. You know, we talk about IKEA, and we do an IKEA case in this course, and IKEA really reinvented the furniture category. They positioned itself on different elements within the category compared to the high-end furniture manufacturers or furniture stores versus the low end. So, and you know, we process and we'll talk through that case. Southwest Airlines is probably the best example, and Southwest Airlines is in a case that, or sorry, in an article that you read. So that Southwest Airlines story is really interesting. Southwest Airlines was a airline that was actually invented on the back of a napkin at a bar, and they were trying to, how do we win? How do we compete? And they really decided on point-to-point service at a low cost. And so they were one of the first low-cost carriers. And everything that they did, back to the Michael Porter article that you guys read, is really based on doing things efficiently at a low cost so we can pass that savings on to the consumers. So the type of planes they had, the type of employee training, everything they did, that whole set of activities that they did were geared towards the value proposition that they were trying to offer to the consumers. Let's see. A couple other examples on the smaller side. Dyson, right? So Dyson in the vacuum category. Dyson came out and looked to communicate its superior engineering and product attributes in terms of more powerful suction, etc., in the vacuum category. The other thing that they did was try to offer that at a premium price. So Dyson created and grew over time because people connected with it. Yeah, it was premium, but it actually did have more powerful suction, and it had really unique design elements, and that's why Dyson was successful in terms of stemmed out of their actual technology and the product itself, but how they actually positioned it in the marketplace allowed Dyson to be successful and actually win in their category. So for a lot of companies, this choice in brand positioning actually creates something bigger for them and actually creates a greater resonance with consumers in terms of some of the execution of their positioning that they're rolling out. So Dove a few years ago created a beauty myth ad campaign, and they used, I guess, not pure models in their ads, and looking at improving women and their daughters' self-esteem through that campaign, and it really resonated with consumers. But it was different in terms of how the other companies in the category were trying to communicate value. So Dove was able to break through the clutter and all of the mess by making that connection, by going against the category norms in terms of how they communicate value. Mini Cooper is another one that actually, during the early 80s, late 70s, small cars were kind of in favor, and then they fell out of favor. And so Mini Cooper launched their small car concept and tried to create a buzz about it, and it had a lot of like unique features and benefits, and they were really emphasizing the smaller is better, it's more fun. And some of the things that they did to try to cut through the clutter and create value is they actually bought seats for a Mini Cooper and helicoptered it into several NFL playoff games to try to create that awareness and connections for people to understand the Mini Cooper. The other thing the Mini Cooper did that created a huge exposure for Mini Cooper was they were featured in the movie The Italian Job, which was as a sports car. So it kind of broke the mold of the capabilities of that car by using it in that movie setting. So what does successful positioning do at the end of the day? It creates that connection in people's brains where you're actually owning a piece of that person's brain. And Walmart, what's the connection with Walmart? Always low prices. And so companies that are successful in their positioning create these associations, and sometimes stronger associations than other companies, but companies that are successful create those associations that have resonance with consumers. Okay, so you're a company and you're trying to figure out kind of what are the positioning options for your company. So remember, the best thing and first thing you have to start with, we talked about understanding the competitors, understanding the customers, understanding our capabilities, so the C's basically. But here's some kind of that back to those basic questions in terms of asking these questions can start really getting you to an understanding of what our positioning should be or could be, etc. So why? Why is it important we exist? What do we believe in? You have to kind of have that as a baseline. What do we offer? How do we behave, our attitudes toward the world, and then what are we change we're going to bring out? So these are some high-level kind of things, but it's actually thought starters really trying to get your positioning strategy going. So when people are coming up with their strategies and they have different aspirations for their company, a lot of questions is it better to be the biggest or is it better to be the thought leader? And so, you know, obviously or usually the biggest, and the market leader became the market leader through different successes and their ability to communicate value, and they were probably successful in positioning and had great products. But a lot of times the smaller companies can break through and actually grow and have success by being the thought leader and be the company that gets talked about. And there's a lot of companies that have done this. So companies still can compete in a market space or a segment where there is a big leader in the company, as long as they can kind of do it differently. And that's really the essence of positioning. Can you recreate the definition of value in a category by doing something different, and then you're the one that gets talked about? So there's lots of examples of companies that have done this in terms of JetBlue in the airline industry, Southwest we talked about, and we gave some other examples about that. But it's a decision that companies need to think through in terms of understanding the dynamics within their category that has to have implications on their positioning strategy. So if you look at positioning mindset and companies continuing to have success, here's an example of two big companies that have grown and have been successful for a very long time, but they're still constantly trying to reinvent themselves and remain relevant in the mind of their consumers. So Nike is a great example because Nike faces competitive pressure and companies that are competing with them hard at all times, and they kind of go in and out of favor. If you look at Adidas, if you look at Reebok, or different companies they've faced and battled over time. Most recently, the best example of a competitive challenge they faced was Under Armour, and Under Armour came out with some unique and interesting approaches to communicating value. But Nike is still relevant and still the big Goliath, but they need to have that mindset that they want to be the industry David. That's a quote from Phil Knight. Walmart, same thing. If you look at that, Sam Walmart, they want to make sure that they don't just get caught up in the conventional wisdom in the industry, that they keep reinventing themselves and look for opportunities to consistently improve and change their positioning and make that connection, relevance, and resonance with their consumers.